Chapter 121 Box Poison Needles Kill. There was a mansion beside Shinjing Road in Kyoto, which was bought by Wang Qinian with 120 taels of silver, with several formalities in between, so I believe no one can find out who the real owner is. Fan Xian frowned as he looked at the two big men tied up tightly in the corner. The big men's mouths were stuffed full with stinking rags, their faces were red, the corners of their eyes were streaming with tears, they couldn't speak, and naturally they couldn't commit suicide by biting their tongues. "Where did you catch them?" Fan Xian asked softly. The four personnel behind Wang Qinian bowed and responded, 7 miles outside the city, Lord Wang found the other party's trail. The other party wanted to argue after we blocked them, but couldn't help us checking, so they admitted the account. After the Lord left the capital yesterday, these two people have been following them. I just don't know what method they used to notify their people of this, and I don't know what kind of relationship they have with the Eastern Palace, actually. Arranging for this coincidence to happen. What relationship, actually arranging this coincidental encounter? Fan Xian frowned, not thinking that he had casually guessed, but really pulled out a conspiracy clue. It seems that he is not too wise, really too many enemies are too stupid, Kyoto is too dark, everyone has a black tail with a hair fork behind their ass. He also understands that his subordinate said to check, must have used torture, but since the other party admitted what means used, naturally no one cares. Have you asked clearly whose people it is yet? Fan Xian lowered his voice and asked Wang Qinian. Wang Qinian shook his head. The less my subordinate knows, the better, so I'm waiting for your honor to interrogate him personally. Fan Xian nodded, pleased with his caution, but immediately afterward he fell into deep thought himself. He looked at the two big men in the corner, and easily saw something else between the other's brows, and anyone who possessed such a resolute demeanor, yet had not been trained in torture and punishment, firstly, could not be from the supervisory court, and secondly, could not be from the imperial palace, having long ago tested that they were not eunuchs. So the most likely, or the second prince's private force, of course, that far at the foot of the Inshan mountain of the great prince, cannot get off the suspicion. At this time, Fan Xian suddenly recalled his father Sinan Bo's words, when you don't know who is your enemy, don't make enemies indiscriminately even if you know who is your enemy, so what? Assuming one asked if the second prince had done it, could one really kill his way into the royal residence? Fan Xian smiled bitterly, knowing that there were some things that were better left unasked. No need to ask. Fan Xian rubbed his brow, as if there was some depression there, kill them all. Yes. The subordinates were all stern ghosts of the inspectorate, so there was not a hint of surprise at this bloody order, and they calmly walked forward, pulled out the waist knife beside them, and stabbed it into the waist and abdomen of those two big men, and 2 puffs sounded one after another, and the two big men's feet stomped 2 times in a haphazard manner, and their eyes rolled over and they were dead. Bury them properly. Fan Xian commanded, making no pretense of showing a bit of grief. Yes. The subordinate answered. After leaving this courtyard, they traveled through the alleys of Kyoto for a long time before the two of them took to the main road. Wang Qinian accompanied him on his walk, maintaining the silent politeness that a subordinate should have. Fan Xian suddenly opened his mouth and said, when will the missions from Northern Qi and Dongyi City arrive? The courtyard should have information on that. Wang Qinian responded, since entering the country, the 4 places have been assisting the local officials to receive them, and looking at the dates, they should arrive early next month. Fan Xian nodded, help me find out what kind of people are on the other side. In addition, he said after a short pause, if it's not considered a bad rule, can you trouble the courtyard to ask the scouts in Northern Qi to get some information back? And it's best to find out clearly, what is the bottom line of the Baiki mission to negotiate this time. Wang Qinian also heard the Crown Prince's words earlier, so he knew that Lord Fan was going to be the deputy reception ambassador, so he answered in a deep voice, and added, the son of the 4 big leaders, Yen Ruohai, Yen Bingyun, has been lurking in Northern Qi for 4 years, and is very effective, so I guess there should be quite a lot of good material. Fan Xian reminded him, this kind of thing should be talked about less in the future, or else if the people of Northern Qi know about it, I'm only afraid that Lord Yan's son will be in danger. Wang Qinian smiled and explained, as the Tizen, Your Excellency has the authority to know about this matter. Fan Xian also smiled, it's better to know less about this kind of responsibility. Wang Qinian looked at the gentle smile on his lord's clean face, and then thought of the murder in the courtyard. His mood was a bit strange, and he asked softly, since it's better not to know than to know, why do you still want to investigate? These 2 deaths don't seem to be necessary. Fan Xian calmly replied, although not knowing is better than knowing, it is still necessary to investigate, and those 2 people must also die. Because I have to let others know that I know what they don't want me to know, and the 2 lives are a warning for them not to come back and try to manipulate me. It seems that Oxford Street didn't make those high and mighty characters tighten up a bit, and the death of my second uncle at the foot of Sanshan Mountain was made by the 4 Gu swords, so presumably they think I'm easy to bully? Although the series of no some tongue-twisting meaning, Wang Qinian, slightly confused, but still gradually clear the meaning, nodded. Fan Xian suddenly curled his lips and smiled, don't worry that I haven't seen blood or dead people, you don't know how I grew up. The world was peaceful in the latter days, and no one seemed to care at all about the deaths of those 2 nameless dudes. But Fan Xian surmised that this matter must have begun to play a role. Occasionally going to the Taishan Temple, occasionally going to the Tanyu bookstore to collect money, occasionally going to the tofu store, occasionally going to the Chancellor's residence to get closer to his future father-in-law, occasionally sneaking into the imperial courtyard at night to fall in love with him, and occasionally staying in the Fan Mansion to tell stories with his sister and copy some books to read, were all of Fan Xian's lives in these days. This night, he washed up, ready to go to bed. His eyes fell on the black leather box thrown aside. He didn't know what was in the box, so naturally he would be a bit curious, but he had been in the same room for a long time and the key was unaccounted for, so now he couldn't help but be a bit numb. Of course, if he knew that Chen Pingping also cared about this box, he would have re-estimated the value of the box, and would not have thrown it in the room like rags, but would have dug a big pit under the bed and covered it with 3 layers of steel plates to hide it. Where was the key? As if the heavens had suddenly heard the great question in his heart, a very cold voice rang in Fan Xian's ears. The key is in the palace. Immediately afterward, a windless and silent black stick came from beyond the heavens and ruthlessly smashed into Fan Xian's back. With a muffled sound, Fan Xian was unable to avoid it and was heavily knocked to the ground, his back bursting with raw pain, and he coughed twice in some agony, blowing up a few wisps of ash in front of his face. You've regressed. Although Five Bamboo's voice was devoid of emotion, it was clear that he held a rather negative attitude towards Fan Xian's performance. Uncle? Fan Xian had been used to this kind of life since he was a child, and with great difficulty, he climbed up from the ground, the true qi in his body moving slowly to dissipate the pain in his back, and looking at the darkened corner, he couldn't help but say in a low voice, Uncle, not seeing you for so many days, I've really worried myself to death. Somewhat unaccustomed to the passion that flowed from his words, Five Bamboos coldly took half a step back, coldly killing through Fan Xian's lie. I know, you're not worried about me. Fan Xian smiled somewhat bitterly. Indeed, he didn't have much to worry about. A psychopathic clan-level assassin like Five Bamboos, I believe that he wouldn't be in trouble wherever he went. But Fan Xian hadn't seen him for a long time, and really missed him a bit, and was a bit curious, wondering what he had been doing these days. Perhaps Uncle Five Bamboo had been by his side all along, and he didn't know it. Five Bamboo continued, the key is in the palace. It took a second repetition for Fan Xian to wake up and frown slightly, followed by a sudden realization, so you've been looking for the key all these days. It's a relic of Miss. I shouldn't have listened to Chen Pingping and left the key in the capital in the first place. Five Bamboo's tone was still indifferent and unlike a mortal. I searched for some days in the palace and initially calculated 3 possible places. Too risky. Fan Xian lowered his voice and growled, slightly annoyed deep inside. Although Uncle Five Bamboo had the strength of a grandmaster, but the inner palace was not a good place, not to mention that the guards were all masters. Alone Fei Jia had once mentioned that the most mysterious one within the 4 grandmasters had always been hidden in the palace. Five Bamboo even risked staying in the palace for so many days, if in case he was discovered, that mysterious Grand Master would naturally strike, plus the 500 Bunchi Banji. I'm afraid that even if Five Bamboo's divine power was heavenly, he wouldn't have the means to come out alive. As if he hadn't noticed Fan Xian's resentment, Five Bamboos continued indifferently, "Do you want the key?" Fan Xian calmed down. In his heart he understood the intention of Uncle Five Bamboo's visit today. The other party had always been a person who hid in the darkness if there wasn't something that needed to be exchanged. Fan Xian even doubted that the other party would never meet with him for eternity, just protecting him in the shadows. And this night, Five Bamboo came to say about the key, that must not be to ask for his opinion, but because this matter needs his participation. Just Uncle Five Bamboo to take one thing in this world. If it is all very difficult, what can one help? Fan Xian thought while saying softly, "What do you need me to do?" "Those 3 places in the palace are very difficult to enter," Five Bamboo said expressionlessly. Fan Xian was a little curious about which 3 places they were and opened his mouth to ask. Xingqing Palace, Hanwan Hall, and Guanxing Palace. Fan Xian was stunned and laughed bitterly. Inside the palace, these 3 places were indeed the most heavily guarded, respectively the residence of the Emperor and Empress Dowager and the Princess, not to mention the worst place to enter in the palace. It could simply be said that it was the most difficult place to enter in the whole world. "I want you to find a way to drag that eunuch called Hong Xiang outside the palace for an hour." Fan Xian frowned slightly. "Eunuch Hong?" "The leader of the eunuchs in the palace, a veteran of 3 dynasties. I heard that he has been in the palace since the day of the founding of the country, and is deeply powerful, but if you're going to go to the palace to steal the key, why do you want me to trick him into going outside the palace? What is the relationship between this?" He suddenly thought of something and raised his head in surprise to look at the black cloth on Wu Zhu's face, and said in a trembling voice, "Could it be that Eunuch Hong is the most mysterious of all the great masters in the legend?" Fei Jie said back then, "The world's 4 great masters, one for the 4 goose swords of Dongyi City, one for the Northern Qi State Master Bitter Lotus, one for the Celebration State's Luyun Scattered Hanji Luyun. There is another one who is also a person from the Celebration State, just that no one has ever known who he is, and with the power of the supervisory yuan, one can only vaguely detect that this great master should be hiding inside the Celebration State's imperial palace." Five Bamboo shook his head. "I don't know. I haven't fought with him, but I do know that inside the current imperial palace, the easiest person to spot me is the eunuch called Hong Xiang." Fan Xian nodded. In his mind, according to Five Bamboo's caution, then this old eunuch Hong must be an unfathomable figure within the palace. Even Five Bamboo was afraid. I'm afraid that eunuch Hong's identity as a Grand Master had already been called out. With Five Bamboo's cold temperament, even Yi Luyun can kill, just not kill, naturally will not be afraid of any of the great masters under the sky. Just last time is in order to hide their relationship with Fan Xian, so violent. But this time it is in order to steal the key, so there is a difference in the style of action. Fan Xian thought about the recent arrangements, linked to the North Qi and East Yi City envoys, never thought of a good way to get in touch with the head eunuchs in the Deep Palace. This matter is not convenient to ask his father to appear, or else he will have to explain a lot of things that he does not want to explain. Suddenly his eyes lit up, said, "Wan Er should be clear about the things in the palace. She is in the palace, has been living until the beginning of this year before moving out. I go tomorrow to walk her way." Five Bamboos gave him a noncommittal look and said coldly, "I only need you to drag Hong Xiang outside the palace for an hour. As for what method you use, that's your own business." Fan Xian shrugged. "Uncle always gives me the toughest tasks." It was a persistent joke, and as he hadn't chatted with Five Bamboos for some days, he seemed to have forgotten that Five Bamboos didn't actually have much of a sense of humor, only to hear Five Bamboos say seriously, "Then I'll go and kill Hong Xiang, successful or not, and I'll be able to consume him for roughly 3 hours, and you'll go and find the key inside the palace." Fan Xian realized that he had lifted a still-hot meteorite and smashed it hard on his foot, and hurriedly said gently and with immense respect, "It's just stealing an item. It's better not to be too risky to challenge Hong Xiang. I'll go and try to make contact with him." Only after Wu Zhu left did Fan Xian remember that he seemed to be unable to locate the other party, so how should he inform this blind uncle in the future if he arranged everything? Laying back down on the bed again, the eyes that looked at the black suitcase again at this point were somewhat different. If the key is bound to be placed in the palace's most closely guarded place, what this importance seems to be, the box must be hidden inside of very important or very scary things. For example, the border defense map, the roster of senior spies of the supervisory yuan established by Lao Ma, or the treasure map of the Yi family? No longer able to sleep peacefully, Fan Xian stood up and kicked the chest into the bottom of the bed, as if he thought it would be much safer.